we're going to talk about puppetry
Yes,
today.
yes, we
Hell
were going to
yeah.
talk about, Eastern Rite religions, yes.
Yeah, so because that's what I think as well. I've taken so many classes at Beaut. There's one where the professor talks to you and says, these are the facts.
Mm-hmm.
This is the didactic version of this narrative, and you take notes, right? Mm-hmm. I'm taking your class now, by the way, which is where's the camera? Right there. Okay. The class is communicating abstract ideas through puppetry, complex ideas through puppetry, and most of our classes is spent brainstorming, but then a lot of it is spent actually building stuff, and you've brought some of the stuff here as well, as I can see. So just to start off the stuff, what got you into puppetry?
What got me into puppetry? I always loved puppetry, and actually lately I've been thinking about how when I was like in 5th grade, I was obsessed with the idea of being on Sesame Street, but then of course that got buried, so I'm not going to say that those were like the seed and this has been building since then, but I did remember, oh yeah, in 5th grade I really wanted to be on Sesame Street. But I guess I was a K through 12 teacher for a long time, Spanish and then art. And we would always do puppets in the classroom. I think I've always had like that kind of draw towards dramatic and kind of enacting things and stuff. And then eventually I went back to grad school to pursue my own work. And at that time I was making kind of these large ceramic tableaus, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and get an MFA in ceramics and that. But life was really complicated because I lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that's where my kids lived. And then when I got accepted into grad school in Madison, Wisconsin, which is about a 4-hour drive, I couldn't take them. I mean, I was divorced, and their dad, wanted them to stay in Minnesota. So I did a lot of like crazy back and forth for 4 years, and sometimes less back and sometimes more forth. And so the idea of making kind of large scale ceramic work and letting it carefully dry and then staying up all night to fire it in a gas kiln, like that didn't happen. In fact, very little art would happen until I had a huge deadline, and then I would just, literally throw things together. And there was this store in Madison, Wisconsin called the Dig and Save, which is this by the pound thrift store. So it's literally bins and like, enormous containers full of cast off items, and you just dig, and then you put it in a basket and they weigh it. And so, for $20 you can walk out with an enormous quantity of things. And so I've always been kind of drawn to people's cast offs, and also I think like kind of losing a house in this process, losing a home in this process. There was something about all those domestic kind of items that I started wanting to kind of accumulate. And I also was having kind of this feeling about just really struggling with what it is to be a mother, because in our society, if a father needs to go to do something really important just to be able to kind of keep their career or establish a new career, like we understand that because we know that men kind of need to sort of self-actualize, and we also think that that we have this association with them as sort of like these breadwinners, so that like for them work and those kinds of things comes
rite of
first.
passage for boys, like that's the way we see it.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And for women, like leaving your children under any circumstances to go away, to be separated is just, it's almost like a taboo. And not only is it like, it's certainly there's a real aspect to it of the separation, but then there's all the psychological layer for the mother of like bad mother, and and then there's also the psychological layer for the kids. It's really hard to believe your mom loves you if she has gone to take classes and you don't only see her like for a few days every 2 weeks, like that's very difficult. And your mom can love you deeply, like I love my kids, but everyone in society is basically giving you the message.
They're perpetuating that there's something inherently wrong.
Yeah, or she can't possibly love you if she's also studying something, but for me, it just like wasn't a choice. Like I just needed to do this thing. And I think, it's taken many years, but I think, we're kind of at this point where it's like maybe I've been forgiven on some level. And also there's this kind of understanding also about just life is complicated. It's hard to be a human being, and it's, So this is like a very, very long way of telling you how I got into puppetry.
I love that insight.
Okay.
I think that was really, it's you're just, pouring your psyche out, and that's what we need.
Yeah. So there's no, like one time my daughter just said to me, Mom, do you think you're a verbal processor by any chance? Like very facetiously. And it's like, yeah. But yeah, so I think for me, I had all these stories that I was trying to work out, and I mean, you're into Jung, and so you know, like I was all into Demeter and Persephone for a while, you know, and I was listening
all
to
the Greek myths and
and I was listening to Thomas More, who is like another Jungian. I think he was like a Catholic priest.
Is it Robert Moore or Thomas Moore?
I think it's Thomas Moore.
Because I know Robert Moore because I read some of his works. But either way.
Okay, but there's somebody who talked about this, I think it was like Demeter thinking, or I can't remember what it was. Anyway, but I was very into that. And so I was like, I don't know, I sort of really turned to like fairy tales and mythology and all stuff, and even like these medieval bestiary stories, which I won't get into because that's like a whole nother thing. But I got into these things as sort of ways of kind of dialoguing with my own feelings of kind of, literally at points like self-hatred, like how can I do this? Like how do these kids get this horrible mother? Like who cursed them? But I would be their mother. But you just like have to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
There's no like paralysis and like, oh, now I'm going to just sit down and feel like sorry for myself because I'm such a lousy mother. So, it was just like a process of like turning to stories. So I had these stories, a lot of insomnia. So I'd wake up in the middle of the night and like sing or talk into my iPhone. So I had all of this material.
I do that at you now.
Okay, great. Well, hey, it's great material for puppetry because because postmodern puppetry can be made out of just about anything. As long as you have stories that you want to tell.
Right.
And I'd be driving a lot back and forth, so I would also like talk or tell stories into my phone when I was on the road.
Can you give yourself pep talks sometimes on those recordings and you hear that and you're like, is that me?
I'm more into wallowing and and self-flagellation, I wish I could have given myself pep talks.
It's hard.
Yeah. I was more into like, let me feel how miserable I feel.
Yeah.
But so then, so I was making these like kind of odd figures, like, I don't know if I guess like, like things like this. Like I would go to the dig and save, and so I'd have this horrible pot holder that was just like this pot holder is like beyond beat up, but there was something very like meaningful about that. And I was making like, maybe I made this head in some kind of like workshop but never got around to making a body that worked with it. So I'd have like all of these kind of strange parts of figures out of all these weird materials.
I love just how desecrated it was.
Yes, exactly. And this wasn't, I think in the beginning it was like, well, I never meant to like manipulate these things because I really didn't feel like I had any performance skill. I just thought, well, I'll make them and I'll let them sit there and the potential of animating them will be enough. Well, that was kind of a cop-out, I think. But they are, I think they're very enigmatic. Like I think she has a lot of presence. As her head pops off. She's barely holding it together. She's moved around a lot, as have I.
How old is this puppet?
She's probably about 5 years old, maybe.
Wow.
And so like I had made like these tiny little ceramic hands, and I had this body, and then this head was made in something else, and I could never quite get myself together to complete something. So I was just, pulling together these different parts. So I had this stuff, and I had stories, and it's like suddenly it's like, and then of course, something weird sort of happens when you're making work. I think that a lot of it becomes autobiographical. It's not like you sit down and say, I'm going to make something that speaks about my life. But you make it and it's like, damn, this thing speaks about my life.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? So anyway, and then so how I actually kind of made this breakthrough, like got into puppetry. Okay, so I was doing sort of some weird performance art stuff for a while. I was like piling clay on like these houses, and let's not even get into that. But
by the way, context for the viewers and listeners: Professor Amato actively picks up stuff from outside, like and trash, and gets to the class, and we end up using that, and it's great.
Yeah. I have dumpster dived for you guys. Yeah. So
you were saying,
no. So I ended up taking this workshop. So Chicago has this every other year International Puppetry Festival, and so the first year they had it, I think it was there was a workshop being offered by this guy named David Commander, who's a puppeteer, really edgy kind of.
Yeah, you sent us.
Yes.
You said don't watch it because it might be too graphic.
Yeah. His language and stuff was yeah. And I had seen him perform in Minneapolis, and it just blew my mind because he had like assembled this like strange kind of like essentially sort of like a government housing complex, like, but it was all of cardboard boxes, and it was like on fire in the basement, and then he had like these TVs with like a live feed or some kind of feed so that you'd periodically see a toy car drive through. So it was like this abandoned parking garage that every now and then a car would go through.
And this is all the puppetry set?
Yeah, it was like an installation. It was like this puppetry installation. And then there he was in the middle in one of these kind of boiler suits with the cutoff thing, covered in tattoos. He's got a voice modulator. He's got a chapstick in his mouth. And then he has this tiny little camera. So he's going through these hallways that he's made out of cardboard. And he'd kind of break into one of these rooms. He'd take the chopstick out of his mouth, and then he would push it on the bottom of the box. And the bottom of the box would move just enough that the McDonald's Happy Meal toy that was glued in there would, bounce up and down and rage against the man, like the man. And each room was somebody else who had another kind of beef with the man. And it was just like, so you could either what was so amazing to me is you could go over and you could watch him doing this. Like you could literally get your face into the set, or you could watch it live streamed on this screen where you were actually seeing kind of the camera's eye view. And then with this bank of TVs showing this parking garage that was also a toy parking garage. And it was just like, this is amazing. So I had a chance to take a class with him because it was like 2 weekends, like 3 hours each weekend. And it was called How to Multitask Without Freaking the F blankety blank
You
blank.
used to do that pretty fine in class. You can really multitask. I've seen that.
But he was doing like voice modulators and like he was switching channels. So he's filming this and he's filming that. But what I loved about that class is they really drove home the idea that people go to live theater to see you mess up and see you get out of it. They don't go to live theater to see perfection because they could watch that on TV. So they really pushed this idea that everything that we did, no matter how real, how raw, how whatever, that was what people wanted to see. And they actually, the neo-futurists who hosted him actually do something where they try to do like all of Shakespeare's plays in one night, which of course they can't do, so they fail each time.
But so what's it's interesting, deliberate failing.
Pardon?
They deliberately
they deliberately fail. And what's interesting is like, how are they going to fail tonight? So all of this stuff was just like, whoa,
That's so fascinating.
Hi. Oh, no, that's okay. Do you need to come in and get something?
Oh, do you mind if I grab my stuff?
Yeah, please go right ahead.
Please come on in.
Okay.
Public space. So like all of that just, and then they would just have us like work for half an hour and then have to put something on and then work for another half an hour and put it on again. And so it was deliberately, again, like you said, designed for us to fail. Like we'd fail in whatever perfection we wanted, but we'd succeed in something else. And so then I went back to grad school and, was like, I'm doing performances and I had some different stories I wanted to tell and I would piece things together and I started doing like these kind of puppetry pieces basically and
That's so fascinating. Just that whole, what you just said. I didn't know there were audiences who had developed taste to watch something like failing because, oftentimes even the stuff that we saw at Puppet Show Play Slam, because I went to watch that slam, most of it was pretty immaculate.
Yeah. Although I suppose there's always that notion that there could be failure when it's live or something. But you're right. I suppose like audiences have, they have a limited tolerance for that. Like they don't want to pay money and then go and then be like,
you watch improv comedy and like and sometimes it's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're pushing the limits of, like I'm paying to see something and be dazzled through the senses in some capacity.
Yeah.
I appreciate, your process and the raw effort and all of that. But at the same time, it's like, to what extent are you going to fail and do it again and again, right? So I think that having the existing knowledge that I'm going to go watch failure and enjoy it is really important. Because if you're just like someone who's uninitiated and says, okay, well, why is this not working? And everyone is like, oh, I'm loving it though.
It's failing. Oh, this failure is so great.
But talking about...
so real.
Yeah, talking about sort of failure, you said you did a bunch of other performance art and stuff before you finally got into puppetry. My question is, as someone who's artistic, I've definitely had this where I started off with writing, and your friends and family say, "Oh, you're a great writer." Like you get excited, right?
Yeah.
But then, a good writer says you're terrible, and then you say, "Okay, I'm gonna resent writing for the next 2 years. I'm gonna do something else." And you start music, then you do drawing and painting, all of those things. It took you a while to finally get to this medium.
Well,
right?
Late 40s.
Oh, wow.
Late 40s.
So, could you just talk about that process? What's that been like? Sort of struggling through these mediums and finally finding
Yeah.
this is like where my medium is at.
I mean, I think like for me, like I've never been able to just like completely be an artist. So I've always been like a teacher or something else, and those things in pretty much usually override the art making. So I've never been able to just be an artist, and
Right.
so I think for me, it isn't quite the same as it would be for someone who they really wanted to get to a point where like I am an artist and this is how I identify. So for me, a lot of times it's like whatever I'm doing is whatever I'm dialoguing with in my teaching, and so yeah, I'm trying to think of like what I'm trying to say with that. I mean, I think I was perfectly happy when I was an undergrad. I just like only wanted to draw and paint, and then for a long time when I got back into art in my 30s, it was all about like clay and carving things out of clay and stuff, and I was perfectly happy with that.
Yeah.
But it was really, I think the puppetry, and in some ways the name is almost like gets in the way, because it's like it's like making
You're playing with
stuff.
puppets? What are you, a
Yeah,
kid? You know?
exactly. It's like making stuff and telling stories.
Yeah.
It's like when that was like that can be my art form, is making stuff and telling stories. Then I feel like that felt very like right for me. But I still like, I mean, I rarely get to actually make work. Like that's
Right.
always on the back burner. But I make enough that I kind of keep that kind of part of me open, and
Yeah.
so, and then bring it into my teaching. And I think I don't know, like in a lot of ways the teaching is part of a practice as well, like whether I make something big to show on some stage or something like that almost isn't as important as continuing kind of this curiosity and to develop kind of skills or interests that kind of loop into the teaching.
Yeah.
And maybe part of that is I'm just resigned to the fact that that's kind of in life, like teaching will always probably be like my livelihood. But I also really enjoy it, and it's also it's interactive and
Right.
stuff. So yeah.
What are some of the myths? Because I know there's many myths about puppetry.
Oh yeah.
Anywhere from puppets are for kids.
Yeah.
What do you like? That's what when I said to my
Yeah.
roommates, hey, I'm gonna host a slam. I'm gonna perform in a slam, and would you guys like to help me? He's like, what's the slam about? It's like puppets. One of them were like, oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
And I was like, puppets?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
just for everyone else who's listening
Yeah,
in right now,
yeah.
why the hell are we talking about puppets? Could
Puppets.
you sort of
Yeah.
dispel some of the myths?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even know if it's like, specific myths. I mean, I just think that people have no idea what range there is in puppetry, especially contemporary puppetry, but even, I mean, probably at any point in time. But especially, I think, I guess specifically contemporary puppetry. I mean, I gave you guys a lot of videos to look at, and there's, people that are doing kind of work with like live actors and then life-size puppets and kind of interacting that way. There's much more of, I guess it's kind of a postmodern sensibility of sort of like pulling back the curtain to see how things are being made. So there's a lot more kind of copresence where you see the manipulators. And to me, that's more interesting in a way, like, because I always felt like when I was doing something that I felt like was a puppet performance and I was in it, I felt like the theme of the puppet the theme of the piece was not what the puppet was doing. It was literally like me in the space trying to manipulate the puppet, trying to tell a story. So it's much more kind of that postmodern sort of meta, pull back the lens.
Yeah.
But I felt like that was really what it was. It really was about my kind of struggle to use these objects to tell a meaningful story. It really wasn't about this object is telling a meaningful story, look at it. It's so I think that there's that. I think so many people are doing film and puppetry blends. There's still very traditional puppeteers, like people who are, very virtuosic in kind of very, traditions that have a very long lineage and have a
Right.
real craft to them. But then there's also people who are just, blending improv or being intentionally really like kind of handmade and kind of thrown together just to talk about that, like to talk about that or talk about something with that aesthetic. So I guess what I think is that people have no idea how broad the medium is.
Yeah.
And so much of it is made for adults, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the most cutting edge puppetry right now is made for adults, because I think it's also, a lot about where we're at kind of as a species, you know. I don't know if species is what I really want to talk about. It's not really our biological beings, although it could be about that, but it's really about like kind of our psychology and this kind of moment in time when like there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, I mean, we don't know where like all this AI and robotics and things are going. I mean, surveillance, we don't even know if our own thoughts are our own anymore. Like, you know, I mean, we really are kind of in this very, almost sort of like a crisis of kind of losing my words here, but I'm thinking,
But
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna try to answer, like, help you
Yes,
brainstorm.
help me. Help me.
It's sort of like we have reached beyond the seams of what we thought was possible,
Yes.
and now we've left too many things out in the place that's uncertainty. So we no longer know what our inventions could create,
Yeah.
where we could go, and it's almost like because there's so many possibilities, they're compounding exponentially all across time.
Yeah.
That you sow a seed today, and you see that it's a tree the next day immediately
Yeah.
in terms of ideas and
And
you know.
it's not a tree you recognize, and you're not sure the fruit is safe to eat.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly. So things are sort of, like almost like mutating
Yeah.
out of form. But
Yeah.
again, that's a bit. It's a bit of a nihilistic view. There's also great things, right?
There are great things, but even with the great things, I think we're less sure they're great. I like to use the example. I've used this like with my class before. That like at a certain point, I mean, we all thought that. I think most people thought that the development of like the telephone and kind of like increasing expansion of that was good. It was positive, like being able to have communication. I mean, of course, there were the cliche kind of the old lady listening in on your calls, but in general, I think people felt that greater connectivity was sort of like indoor plumbing, like you can't really go wrong with it. But now I feel like we have very ambiguous feelings about our phones. We feel, I mean, they're not even necessarily phones anymore, and we feel trapped by them, stalked by them. We know we're being surveilled by them. We feel that they suck our time in, they suck our bodies in. They, we know we can't function without them. Like if I lost this tomorrow, I don't know how I'd even like connect. I don't know how I would reach my mother, And so I think that there's even the things that we know are progress. It's like because next year there'll be probably a new iPhone or a new something or another.
Right.
The whole concept of progress has gotten a little bit like murky. So anyway, but to bring it back to puppets, I think it's like people really crave. They crave like materiality. I think like I don't know. I'm not a big CGI fan, and I don't care how realistic it gets. Like I loved Fantastic Mr. Fox, for example. I love going and seeing real.
Wes Anderson is a genius.
Yes, I love to know that something has a little sweater, like a real little sweater that was knit for it. That's important to me, and I think people like to see, like we were just looking at that head in there. Like there's something about this crude paper mache head that speaks about human skin in a way that CGI will never be able to speak about human skin, and I think puppets lend themselves to a real existentialism, because it is, I just read this great quote, and I shouldn't even use it because I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, people don't know how much theorizing and philosophizing goes on around puppetry. I mean, some of the greatest minds, have put themselves to think about how it is the puppets function in the world. But somebody said, the hardest thing for a human actor to do is to die on stage, and the hardest thing for a puppet to do is to live on stage.
Wow.
I'm going to find that for you so that you can put it down in the, in the notes. Who said that? Because
I'll definitely, look it up.
So it was, anyway, but things like that, like bringing an object to life on stage, really speaks to what it is to be alive, what it is to not be alive, etc., in a way that I think we crave, and we crave the material, and we also crave kind of these bigger stories that puppets often tell. Even if they're simple, they are the stories,
Because all we tend to hear at all times is sort of noise and chaos and mixed messages, which is, I'm not saying that That's just how human communication is.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sitting here and telling you, Professor Amato, let me narrate to you a story that has these 7 morals.
Yeah.
And it's told on such a grand scale. I can give you an insight from a story that I read, but then that story is competing with 10,000 other pieces of information that you've already, been receiving from other people and media. And so it's really hard. But when you have objects, you can sort of place your faith on them and let them
Yes.
help
You
navigate.
you really can project onto them, and you experience it in a way that you kind of can't with a human actor. It's harder with a human actor.
Yeah.
I mean, because you know that a part of you, even as an audience member, is called upon in order to animate that. Even if you're not touching it, you with your imagination and stuff. So you're invested, and you're I think it's true. And I think the person who's made this puppet piece has been driven to tell a story, and just when someone is driven to tell a story, we don't have that anymore, like very often of sitting around a fire and having somebody driven to tell us a story.
And it's so critical to who we are as a species,
Yeah.
Because think about it, all the great stories from all different cultures and traditions have been passed down by oral storytelling.
Yes.
It's like elders telling that to children of the tribe, and then around the fires.
Yeah.
And we have the capacity for that. So whenever someone brings those stories to us, or even brings a story to us in that form, we get transfixed.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I saw at the puppet show place, theater here in Boston, because I went there as the first time. It was my second time watching a puppet performance, and I was surprised to find out just how immersed people were. People were laughing at even the slight moving of the hand of a puppet, which I thought was incredible. They were so tuned in.
Yes, exactly.
So,
it's magic. It really is.
I mean, talking about magic, I really think that what you talked about, the projecting your own values on the puppet. So, where's that puppet that you got? The one that I said looked menacing.
Oh, right. Okay, And this one's more of a doll than a puppet, but that's a whole nother story about the difference between puppets and dolls, which I don't think there actually is, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah.
So, I don't know, does it look menacing to you? You have a story behind it.
This is an autobiographical flip doll that I made, so it's,
Oh, wow. I didn't even know of that.
Yeah, so if you were wondering why there seem to be arms peeking out from under the skirt, it's because, so this was, before she gets here, if she's going to come pick me up, this was like, I made this after a very horrible fight with my young adult daughter, in which the more I cried and the more like kind of self-pity I felt, the more like the angrier and angrier she got, the more rageful she got.
Yeah.
And after that I was talking to my therapist, like, I guess, spoiler alert, I have a therapist. Anyway, I talked to my therapist, and my therapist said, well, of course, she said, because masochism breeds sadism. And I thought, oh, so interesting. So, she said, it's like, grip the neck.
But what's really fascinating about this is no matter the contrasting emotions, they're still connected, which is, sort of how I conceptualized I'm not that's how I conceptualized the relationship between a mother and the daughter. Yeah. They're sort of extensions of each other, but they're constantly fighting for, because it's not always hunky-dory. It's not always...
No. Yeah, no, it's not. And, it kind of goes back to, like, we were talking about Demeter and Persephone, which a lot of people think that, they really were the same person. It really wasn't so much about a mother and a daughter.
Just for context, what's the story of Demeter and Persephone?
So Demeter, or some people say Demeter. I don't like Demeter. I like Demeter, but whatever. So Persephone, Demeter had this daughter named Persephone, and I may get it wrong, but I may get some of it wrong. I don't get the basics wrong. But she... was out, and I'm sure because there's a whole backstory, because there always is with Greek mythology, but she was out playing in a field, and Pluto, or Hades, I guess it was.
Pluto
it's
is the
Hades.
Greek, and Hades is the Roman, or vice versa.
So Hades came up from the underworld, and she was out picking flowers in a field, and I think he'd been put up to this, but he decided to take her as his bride, so he kidnapped her and took her down into the underworld.
Yeah.
And her mother, of course, was distraught, and she spent a long time searching for her, and she had her whole own story that doesn't get told as often, but she went to the different, gods and asked for them to intervene, and finally I think that they intervened, but what they told her is she could only have Persephone back if she hadn't eaten anything in the underworld, and it turned out that she had eaten there's different versions, but 6 pomegranate seeds is our version in the West. And so for the 6 pomegranate seeds that she ate, she was required to return every year to those 6 months to the underworld.
Oh.
And so then those would be the times in which her mother, who I neglected to say was the goddess of kind of like agriculture, then things would be barren, nothing grew, it was like winter, or I think in Greece it was sort of like the dry period, because they don't have snow. And then when she came back for the 6 months that she was allowed to spend with her mother each year, that's when things would grow and everything. Yeah, and so so it's this kind of story that sort of explains the seasons, but that's only one thing. It's just for me it was a really interesting idea. But what that, and I think it's Thomas More, but we'll figure out his. Okay. He has like a lot of things about the soul. He writes tons about the soul this, the soul that. But he talks about Demeter mothering, which is allowing your daughter, but in some sense is allowing yourself to be able to go to the underworld, because like every good mother,
that's
every
like
good
the
mother
idea of
needs
the shadow.
like every good mother needs to allow her daughter her time in the underworld. But also in some senses, by allowing that, every good mother needs to allow the daughter within herself to her journey into the underworld, instead of, which is very kind of different
I'm getting
than.
goosebumps right now.
Oh.
Because
Is it just because she's looking
no,
at you?
it's because it makes perfect sense, because something like that is happening in my mother and my sister's life right now. Absolutely right now. Where my mother is confronting the idea that she spent all her life nurturing us and stuff.
Yes.
And now my sister is sort of ready to take the flight. She might come to BU as a student, right?
Wow.
So she's struggling with how to establish meaning again.
Yes.
And what's happening is, this is especially true if you say that you're a good person.
Yes.
That you find out that not everything inside you is good, and then you look you look in the depths and you see someone that you don't like.
Whoa.
So this has been, and I've been supporting her through the process, because I think this is needed. I think it was coming for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's where my sister and my mother are finally separating and going their own ways for the first time in 16, 17 years.
Wow.
And obviously, as all good stories do, they're going to come back again. But both of them as changed individuals.
Yes, very, and that's important, but it's painful. Yeah, very true. Wow.
I felt the same when I left. For me, it was slightly different because, like you said, guys are sort of expected to go and answer the call to adventure.
Yes.
But it was still hard for her. And now, now that I come back, we talk to each other as if we're individuals, which is really weird. A weird thing for me, because I didn't I just grew up and I didn't realize that there would be a time when I would become an individual and my parents would be individuals, not an umbrella.
Right.
And except for the money part, because I am still but it's just fascinating to see that because we spend this time apart, we've become these different people, and now we can have a conversation. Now there's no because we're not constantly bonded together. We've explored our own psyches, and we can have a conversation. So I guess what I want to talk to you about now, because that was a bit of a tangent about mothers and
that's true. Although for me there are no tangents. It's just more material for puppetry.
So I mean, one thing that I like about puppets is that they can sort of really look into your soul. I don't know why. I just look at the faces, and with a human being you can almost see. You have a corpus of expressions. You know what this means, and that means, and that means, and that means. With puppets, it's almost sort of you don't know what to expect, and they can really look into you.
That actually makes me think of someone once talking about when babies look at you. I mean, there's nothing like being regarded by a baby. You're on a bus or something, and suddenly a baby turns and looks at you. And it's very different than having an adult turn and look at you. And maybe a puppet is sort of like that too. You feel very regarded.
Regarded as in
like observed and seen in a way.
It's almost startling, and I think I get uncomfortable. When babies look at me like that, because it's almost like you're acknowledging my humanity too much.
Yes. Yes. It's like they have this wisdom or something in which they are somehow seeing you with a purity or something. So maybe puppets are a little bit that way as well. Yeah.
So I guess like for someone who's has this dangling idea in their head that maybe they want to get creative and
Yeah.
actually get hands-on, and
Yeah.
how can someone like that start producing puppets? This is a more
Yeah.
demonstrative aspect.
I mean, I think we all basically did puppetry in our childhood. I mean, except for maybe, like 2% of the population who somehow missed out on this. But I mean, like anytime,
toy figures and dolls?
like toys, figures, and dolls, or teddy bears, or anything that we really like, any object that we imbued with life and we really felt could live or could move and tell stories or whatever. And so I think like we all have it in us. And in fact, I feel like the first few times that I kind of started to manipulate something, it kind of freaked me out because it's like, that it's there, like that invitation is there to that magic. Like we all have that. But I think we put so many like barriers to that, so it's very easy to kind of freak ourselves out if we, like you're just sitting alone tonight, your roommates go somewhere and you've got, a teddy bear sitting there or something. I mean, you could literally bring that teddy bear to life, but you might not want to, but as an adult.
I would love to. In fact, I'm going to try that now because I feel like that might be a process of exploration because there's this idea of the Freudian slip. It's like you might start going on this journey and you might say things that will startle you, and then you might realize, wow, this puppet really is the medium for my subconscious mind to speak.
That could be. I mean, they have served as that for a long time. Puppets actually.
How so?
Well, like the whole tradition of like Punch and Judy and stuff, and like puppets kind of saying things that people were taboo. So in some ways, it would be like your own little. You're kind of shrinking this kind of broader function of puppets just down to you in your house and your teddy bear saying things that are taboo for you to say.
It's interesting that you say that because one of the readings you had us made us do for the class was how it basically talked about how puppeteers were considered to be the base of society, tricksters, witches, in the same category. And I'm actually surprised to find out that even now, when you talk about puppetry to someone, they don't consider it high art.
No, they don't. I mean, it's gaining a lot more, I think, respect, and there have been, there's more puppetry in kind of mainstream theater and stuff. So I think it's gaining respect, but still, I think it's easier for people to sort of dismiss it. But and the other thing I would just say is like, I mean, it doesn't even have to be like a figurative object. It can be just like an object that people are kind of moving around. I mean, we all have that available, I think, to us, right?
Bottle.
Yeah, and we all have that ability to see like a body in that or something. Like we all have that ability to look at objects and we see faces and things that I think it's called a pareidolia or whatever that tendency.
How you see faces in clouds.
Yeah, exactly. And so
there was this one woman who saw the silhouette of Jesus in a bread and they auctioned it off for $13,000.
There you go. Yeah. So like I think we all have these different abilities to kind of awaken this magic if we want to, but it's just I think it's just like the whole thing where we don't encourage enough play for adults in general. I mean, play is so good and it's so important and so much a part of generating ideas, but also connecting kind of more, I think with kind of like our souls in a way. And so I think, part of it is just playing around. And, for me, there was always this huge barrier of like, I can't perform. I'm no good at this. And I think, just sometimes just acknowledging that you have those feelings like I might not be good at this, but I want to do it. And then trying it and, because I think for me, I always thought, oh man, I should have gone into puppetry when I was young. And then you hit a certain point of your life where it's like, there's no more I should have when I was young. It's like, you realize that this is the one life, there isn't going to be another. And this whole thing like, oh, I should have done that when I was younger or gotten into that, or I should have taken that direction with my life. I mean, why are you not taking it now? So, I think there's all sorts of things that like, you just at a certain point, like you have to start giving yourself permissions and you sort of have to start breaking down those limits.
Those self-imposed limits that you...
Yes, exactly. And just, find a community. The puppetry community is like super welcoming. I mean, they're very like, if somebody says I like puppets and you say I like puppets, it's like automatically, you've got something there. And there's a global puppetry community that, so I think, finding a community, finding places to try it out, realizing that, puppetry can be almost anything in this day and age. The rules are really very wide open, so, if you want to go sit at the cafe at, McDonald's in the what is the play area? What's the playground area of McDonald's with with a plastic fork and tell a story and have somebody film it on their iPhone, that's whatever, that's puppetry.
100%, yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. anyway.
I never really thought of it in that sense. It's really about limitations because all it takes is, for me, it took one class.
Yeah.
It took
Well,
one class.
you were drawn, like you had the calling, like you said you saw the poster.
I
and it
saw
was
the
almost
poster
like,
and it said
you know, something,
puppetry.
and you were like, you know, so
Yeah, because I was like,
you were
what-
ripe. You're like ripe for the puppetry thing. You just, yeah.
Well, but I have enjoyed it though. I really
Yeah.
think that it's made me sort of connect to that child in me because
Yes.
I've only actively attempted to make something with my hands really sporadically all across my life.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I used to be one of the best drawers in my city, as they would
Yeah.
say, in
Wow.
competition and stuff. But
Oh,
that
wow,
seems
awesome.
like a past life away because I've lost all of that, right?
We haven't lost it, but it's just, you know, I mean, you know.
Yeah,
you
but
really-
I think what happened also is, and this is something I read in a book, it's called Digital Minimalism. I think I mentioned it to you in class as well, is that human beings are not made for tapping their screen.
right,
like,
right.
You know,
Yeah.
they're not made for like tapping their
Yes.
fingers on the screen. That is not a substitute for play or craftsmanship.
Yeah, or different movements
Just
of the
you know,
hand.
just like feeling like this, like just
Yeah.
being able to touch things
Yeah.
and see what they feel
Yeah.
like and the sensation on your skin.
Yes, yes.
And it's funny that you were saying that thing about, you know, you should start now instead of, you know, looking at as your life as if it's already gone by.
Yeah.
Madhav and I were having a discussion about this as we were coming here. He was like, hey man, you know what? Why did we choose comm? We could have just, you know, become CFA students. Like, this seems so much more fun. And I have that conversation with myself pretty much every single time
Yeah.
I come to class. It's like, this is like something, the human inside me, the mammal inside me is saying, this is
Yes,
real.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
happening now.
That's a great way of putting it. It is real. It's very real. Yeah. Well, but you guys are like, you know, very young. Let's just say very, very young. So you can still go on and study art and make art. I mean, this is, you know, you have,
Right.
you know, you've just begun. You've taken a first step in whatever you've done so far. It's just laying groundwork. It's just expanding, you know, what you can draw on. But I mean, I think that's another thing about puppetry is it really is, you know, this kind of total artwork. There's that Wagnerian, like Wagner the composer had that concept of opera being a Gesamtkunstwerk. I probably pronounced it wrong. But it's a long German word that means like a total artwork.
Oh.
Because, you know, puppetry can be music and it can be the script and it's the objects
Acting.
and it's the setting and it's, you know, it's really lighting, you know, it's everything. And so
Right.
really for somebody who has dabbled like you have dabbled, or
Yeah.
even maybe you've more than dabbled, but I just mean it's a dabbler's art in a lot of ways. And
I love
you know,
that. I love
so
that.
I think, you know, it may be your medium, you know, you never can tell.
One of the things this podcast is premised on whole brain thinking, sort of like combining the arts, the sciences, logic,
Yeah.
imagination, math, creativity, all of those things, and fusing
yeah.
them together, right?
Oh yes, because it's the Vitruvian man.
Right, it's
Yeah.
the Vitruvian man. And the reason I sort of, you know, named it that, because I am a dabbler in all
Yeah.
aspects, and I had the hardest time saying, like, can I find a medium that can contain all my
Yeah.
fancies and all my whims and all my
Yeah.
notions? You know, and I've been sort of going through life trying to find that. But when I come here to puppetry,
Yeah.
The only thing that stops me is my inexperience in the sense and the time.
Well, it's, and
Otherwise,
probably time even is the bigger
because
thing.
otherwise the imagination just explodes. Like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if this thing was done well,
Yeah.
how well it could be done and what
Yeah.
could be, you know,
Yeah.
make out of it.
And sometimes how simple too. But the other thing I was going to say, because you were saying like that the puppetry has a lot to do with like play and connecting to kind of your child and that, but it also is like, you know, it's highly intellectual as well, you know, because I mean the decisions that you make about how you're going to move things around and what the layers of signification are, you know, when you have the material and the way things are structured and whether you're visible or whether you're not visible. And I mean, just like, I don't know. I mean, I'm probably not going to be able to state it that eloquently, but to me, it uses all of my intellect to think about how I'm going to design something, especially when you start getting into the idea of wanting to bring metaphor in and not, and then also the metaphor that leaves things ambiguous enough that it's metaphor that even you fully have not been able to kind of encapsulate in your mind, and you will that metaphor will continue to kind of nag and unravel.
It's like a
and
great work of art that you see it
Yes.
every single time and the meaning changes a little bit.
Yes, and you keep thinking about it. So I think really yeah, I mean, I just think there's so many layers in it that, certainly there's kind of like, how can I quickly tell a story? But then there's, when you really start to develop something more and you start to kind of think about, and it doesn't mean that it gets more complicated. It may get more simple or simpler, but I think it's just figuring out kind of where things become symbols or metaphors, or I mean,
Right.
I'm not really saying anything more that I haven't said already, but it just really impresses me sometimes when I start. It was a little bit like what you were saying earlier in the classroom, is that you could realize this specific scene like all of these different ways, but each one would have kind of encoded in it different metaphors, different kind of
there's almost a different
implications,
vocabulary for understanding that.
yeah, different meaning, and it isn't just even the meaning that is the meaning that our mind can make intellectually. It's also kind of embodied meanings and things that we are nonverbal, and the way that you trigger, just people's kind of kinesthetic empathy of like
Right.
feeling and all
Yeah.
of that. So it's both an art that I think invites play and invites kind of a return to kind of childlike thinking, but it also is. I don't think there's anything more intellectual than creating puppet
I think
works.
puppetry really is your sort of psychological inner child work that therapists often propound, because there's this fascinating thing that Alan Watts said. He said that play ! Because life is sincere but not serious.
I love that.
I was just dazzled by that.
Yeah, I love
I
that.
heard it in a track and I kept replaying it. It made so much sense because I sort of came into college with this assumption that become stoic and digest rocks and take on life and all of those things. But over time, as I've had these conversations and taken these classes, certainly with this class, it's become much more fragmented. That belief system is no longer standing because something far more inviting, far more human, something far more, like you said, with that childlike curiosity is emerging out, and it's saying, no, it doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah.
It does. It can just be.
Yeah, and I think the sincerity is the part that isn't hard. Like, it's so much easier to be sincere. But we just like, it's almost like kind of, you can sort of relax into sincerity, but we don't. We like are very like careful of our image, careful of this, careful of that, and when
self-preservation.
Yes, when sincerity would just be like this huge relief and that. Yeah, I love that, and I definitely know, like when I was back in graduate school, I mean, postmodernism, there is a whole kind of irony kind of thing, and there were times when I just felt like a lot of the work that people were feeling like they had to make was about irony and cleverness and all this stuff. And I feel like, yes, there is some ironic and clever puppetry, but all in all, there's also a sincerity that comes with puppetry because it just sort of comes and shows itself to you, like made of what it's made, et cetera. And so to me, all the irony, all the cleverness, all the whatever, I mean, it's not really ultimately what's going to feed us. It is really that sincerity and kind of the mystical and the magical and those kind of things.
Because we've become bored with the facades.
Yeah. It's like, oh, clever, and then you walk away. But something sincere, it's very hard to walk away from. So
I wonder what sort of things or ideas, because you said that when you try to make a piece, it sort of takes a form of its own, and the metaphors keep unraveling over time.
Yeah.
But what's like your deliberate process? Like what are some of the things you want to say through puppets?
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a narrative,
Yeah.
a school of thought.
Well, I mean, I think maybe I told you. I mean, so the piece that I'm working on, kind of worked on and working on again, and thank goodness one of my advisors in grad school said that even when you're not working, you're working, because I'm not really working right now, but I think I'm still working.
Yeah.
Stuff is in the back,
Yeah.
and during the night
You're
when you're
processing
sleeping.
things in your head
yeah.
constantly.
But so I was working on this piece about. I mean, I took Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex,
the
which is
existentialist
which is a piece about it's feminist existentialist philosophy, and so I did a very short piece based on that, and kind of that's sort of in some ways where this class came out of, was this idea that you could make puppet and object work about nonfiction, and you could use it to convey things, because when I was trying to make like bodies and things like that, or to make kind of characters, that becomes that's really a challenging kind of notion, because, are you just going to make little figures and kind of act something out? That doesn't really seem to get at what she was trying to do. So then, I don't know. I don't want to get too much like kind of into kind of where the workings in my mind are
Sure.
right now, but it's more just like how do we show the body? How do we show like the body as other?
Yeah.
Another thing that just even kind of is kind of actually a conundrum that I'm having right now is like when I first started doing the piece. I mean, of course, the piece talks a lot about like this thing called femininity, sort of that's kind of layered over female anatomy, so that female anatomy isn't in and of itself feminine. There's no,
Right.
this is
It is
a
just
culturally
a
layered over
biological, like it's a body. It
it's
doesn't
a
have a
body.
spirit.
Yeah, and it doesn't have like a culture to it, which has to do with lace, which has to do with color, pink, which has to do like all of this stuff is
Right.
layered over because we see that all over the world, women dress and you wear their hair and act in. There are some similarities because most societies are patriarchal, so there tends to be a way in which women's behavior does tend to get sort of focused in certain ways, but there's a vast array of different things that are considered to be the right kind of like the right way to be a female, which it seems like in almost every society there's a certain amount of that.
Okay.
The second
Okay.
sex is primarily about like kind of like males are the one, females are the other, and then how that happens. Like how is it that like 50% of the population allows themselves to become the other? Because they have to sort of participate in
it's
that.
sort of retaking back your essence in a way.
It's really sort of like analyzing kind of how that happens, this process by which because she has that famous line, one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. And what she means by that is that there's an acculturation that happens that we all take on from birth onward, females take on, which becomes what is the equivalent of womanhood, which has to do with certain types of behaviors that are allowed us, certain ways that we kind of move in our bodies or experience our bodies. And it can have to do with like how we're touched. It can have to do with like going through puberty and then suddenly, like having people kind of looking at you or touching you, or like suddenly your body, she says like it's you, but it's something other than you that that becomes kind of a source of vulnerability. And so all of these things are ways of becoming what it is to be a woman, which isn't necessarily a destiny from birth. It's just what happens culturally.
Right.
And so I think that's, and then of course, like you could layer other things onto that, like things that have to do with kind of like race or things like that also kind of get added on that are not about being born in a body, but they're about kind of cultural laying on, which, others people and makes them kind of like not the universal, but like a variation of the universal is,
Not desirable.
Well, or if they're, it's not even necessarily desirable, not desirable, but it's like, it's kind of like who gets to be the universal and then who is the specific.
Right.
And so what she would, like, one of the things that interested me about puppetry with Beauvoir is like, she would say that males can tell universal stories and they can tell male stories. But females can only tell female stories. They can only tell the specific story. And so, and I think you really see it in puppetry. So if somebody sets out to tell some kind of grand tale, they can really easily tell it with all males. Like the hero's journey can easily be told with all males. But if I were to say, hey, I'm inviting you to this production I'm doing about the hero's journey, and you got there, and every character was female, or some of the characters were female, they become very specific. They're no longer the universal hero's journey.
Yeah.
Because females, because of the way that culturally we've shaped things,
It's
cannot tell
fascinating,
they cannot tell the universal
When
story.
I was doing research for the hero's journey, I literally typed the heroine's journey. There is this one woman, I think her name is Margaret Atwood. I'm not sure.
Right, maybe. I mean, she would be.
But there is this one woman who was a student of Jung who wanted to do that. She wanted to, take the heroine's journey.
Yeah.
But I was trying to find out stuff, and I found out that what she did was she just made that journey like in a contemporary setting.
Yeah.
And so she plays those characters there. And then I looked at the Beauvoir Libraries database because I was trying to find out if there's more. I found one Persian story. Again, this is like late modern story. But even then, it was about these two women who were called strong and brave, who were pursued by two men. I was like, that's not really a heroine's journey.
I mean, it's got so much other stuff, and it becomes so specific. It becomes specifically about these female hero's journey. It can't be a universal anymore. Like it isn't like it isn't a story you can relate to because it's very much about what it is to be a female trying to do a hero's journey. Whereas if you tell a hero's journey using male characters, it's not about what it is being a man trying to do because we take that for granted.
Right.
Of course, it's about, So I think that that's a lot of what she was trying to convey is just, and it's really, in some ways, it's a critique. It's sort of her way of pulling back the curtain and unveiling because being an existentialist, I mean, she does believe that we all have choices to make, but it's like until you've had things revealed to you, you may not be able to make an alternative choice because you don't understand what you yourself are immersed in.
Yeah.
And so she talks a lot about how, like it's different. The female-male dynamics is different than like, let's say, between two, let's say like white, kind of like white culture oppressing, let's say black culture, it's very visible what's happening there. And, so the critique is, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but for women, what she would say is their reality and their kind of otherness and their kind of development of even who they are and what it means to be a woman is defined by not being a man, by being sort of like the complement to man. So to untangle that is much more challenging because the oppression or whatever is much harder to see because of the entanglement, so I don't know, that's one of the things she talks about. So
It's
one of the many.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you say that because, I mean, this is a tricky subject because I don't know, like, if you want to, extrapolate on this, but I want to say that I have this speech class in CFA that happens right after the class that I take with you. And she was just talking about gender and communication because it's about speech, right? And she says something like, look at the physiology of all the women around you. And you look around.
Yeah.
And you find that most of them are sort of
Oh.
closed off like this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so she says, if I stand up like this, I'd be considered pretty weird to do that as a woman. And it was like, yeah, I had never thought of that. It makes sense. But the way we were raised in our house, my sister is like a pretty broad stance.
Yeah.
Like when she moves, right?
Yeah.
And so is my mother. But I've noticed this a lot. This sort of physical submissiveness communicated through the body.
Yeah.
In even my contemporaries back home. So, I mean.
Yeah. Well, there's even like a TED Talk, or at least one or whatever, they show that actually influences like the hormones that are released.
100%.
Right? So like if I sit like this, I have different
your
hormones.
serotonin levels decrease versus if you sit like this, like you,
So
that's one of the rules that Jordan Peterson also has.
Oh.
Like stand up straight with the shoulders back. It's sort of to not only just take he just changes posture, but it's sort of to just not even like just take responsibility for your physiology, but to also let serotonin run through your body. Because you sit like this, it's like you feel weak, but then you sit like this.
And I think your countryman BKS Iyengar always said you can't be depressed when your armpits are like when you have...
When you're extending like this?
Yeah, like if you're like laying down or you're doing something, your armpits are open, you cannot be depressed or
That's
something.
interesting.
Some kind of yoga. I've just like, heard him.
But, I sort of want to move to a farther tangent and sort of, formally introduce you here. How are we doing on the time?
We're probably have to wrap up fairly soon. In fact,
Okay.
I'm probably going to be...
For sure, yeah. We'll wrap up exactly in 7 minutes at 7 p.m. So this is... I introduced you the entire time because we just talked.
This has been...
This is my great professor, Dr. Felice Amato, and she has a passion for puppetry and all forms of object performance. She teaches this class called
Thinking Through Puppets.
Thinking Through Puppets, thank you. And as for her credentials, she's taught K-12 art and Spanish in public schools, and then she finally did an MFA and PhD in art from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she's really interested in women's use of puppets and dolls and modern resonance connections for her own work. And there's many other great credentials. She's performed a variety of venues, including the Ballard Institute of Yukon and Open Eye Figure Theater in Minneapolis, and has received numerous awards for artistic work, including a Jerome Foundation grant from Northern Clay Center and 2 Minnesota State Arts Board grants. Wow. She is published in Puppetry International, presented at the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts, Puppeteers of America, and other conferences. and she was recently chosen as an emerging artist at the Eugene O'Neill National Puppetry Conference, where she created a piece based on Simone de Beauvoir's 1949 work, The Second Sex, we were just talking
We're
about.
just talking about.
Some of her interests are women's and feminist studies, folklore and storytelling, making art education accessible to all. I really have to thank Bu for giving me all of this. But that's, so you guys can obviously see that, the sort of comprehensive discussion we had is well placed in just how credible she is as an educator and a puppeteer. Because I certainly did not know that you had done all of these things. But I do believe that, the discussion we were having is just based on so many different things. We went from that German guy in the opera to Jung, and then, emotions, all of those things. But, just to start.
I'm not standing by any of my pronunciation in this.
Hey, we're all still trying to figure this out. So there's no moderators or people analyzing this podcast on the internet. It's like, hey, 10 things Felice Amato got wrong in between that podcast.
Send her back to her pronunciation.
But sort of like a last, just to wrap things up, what is it that you want to talk to young people about? It's a bit of an idealistic question, but...
Young people. Man. I mean, I guess, okay, like I could go in all different directions with this, but I will go in this direction. I think that, I think life is long, and I think that I think there's lots of things, but I think that life is long, and I think that, we should kind of think about continually sort of reinventing ourselves as we go along, and staying engaged, staying curious, just kind of maybe forgetting that trajectory that, you're kind of told about, kind of this life trajectory where you meet someone, get married, get that job,
standard,
keep that job, whatever, because I think in some senses it's not really available anymore to very many people. So I think it's not even probably realistic to hang on to it, but I also don't even think it's necessarily, it really does make life into this linear thing that has like this certain trajectory. So I think like not hanging on to that, and certainly life in some ways is still sort of structured to support that, but I think you just kind of push against it. I guess just kind of embracing your own kind of brain as well, because I think as somebody who probably has some ADHD and some other, these things that could be pathologized if I wanted to, and have at times been challenging, I think that you also we all have, all of these gifts, kind of that, kind of the other side of the hand. And so I think really embracing different kinds of brains and different ways of being in the world, and just trying to embrace those, and just kind of move through the world and just enjoy it. It's,
Hell yeah.
Not enjoy it like it always has to be happy, but engage with it,
Really just, go out and engage with what the world has to offer.
Totally. And know that it's going to be hard sometimes. that's just part of it, but maybe those hard things will lead to good puppet stories, like hero's journey, read about the hero's journey, you can
read the hero's journey on
or the heroine's journey.
Joseph Campbell, great. I'm going to put him as
put in the resources.
But do you want to talk about the class that you're going to do this summer? Because I have some new listeners as well.
It won't be this summer, but I'm proposing a class for the following summer, but maybe that's going to get us too far down the road. But it would be something similar again, but
And if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you? What's some of the mediums?
School of Visual Arts, Art Education, College of Fine Arts at BU. My name's pretty unique, other than all the
Felice
Italian guys,
Amato.
with all the Italian guys with the hairy chests and the gold chains, and who live in Rome. I would probably be the main Felice Amato that would come up.
Okay.
So I think they can track me down.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast with us. This is
really
our first interactive episode with the...
In the trees, in the forest.
Exactly.
The forest of easels.
Easels.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say that we really appreciate you having in the class. We really appreciate having you in the class. Your attitude, your energy, your curiosity, your enthusiasm. It's all just really been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you for being a guest. I really appreciate it. Wow.
All right.